A flight attendant kicked a black family off a plane, then found out the father owned the airline. Her reaction? Priceless. The terminal at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport hummed with the usual pre-flight chaos. Announcements crackling over the speakers, travelers rushing to their gates, flight crews moving with quiet efficiency. At Gate 12, Nathan and Simone Reynolds stood with their two kids, Jaden and Ava, watching the pre-boarding process. They weren't in a rush. First-class boarding hadn't started yet, and after years of flying, they had perfected the art of patience. Nathan, dressed in a grey hoodie and dark joggers, scrolled through his phone while Simone adjusted Ava's tiny backpack. At 7, Ava had an endless curiosity about airplanes. Jaden, 9, was more interested in his Nintendo Switch. This trip was supposed to be a break, a week on the Maui coast, far away from work calls and tech meetings. As the flight crew prepared for boarding, a flight attendant named Jessica Barnes walked up to the counter. She'd been with the airline for nearly 10 years and carried herself with the confidence of experience. She adjusted her blazer, smoothing out the crisp fabric, and glanced toward the first-class line forming near the gate. Her eyes landed on the Reynolds family. Her expression barely changed, but there was a flicker of something. Mild surprise, maybe even skepticism. Nathan glanced up from his phone just in time to see her staring. It wasn't an outright glare, but something about it felt off. He exchanged a quick look with Simone, who caught it too. They didn't dwell on it. The gate agent made the announcement for priority boarding. Nathan pulled out their first-class tickets, gripping Ava's hand as they moved forward. Jessica, now stationed near the entrance of the jet bridge, watched as they approached. "Excuse me, sir," she said, stepping in front of them. "This is for first-class boarding only." Nathan blinked. "I know," he said, holding up their tickets. "We're in 2A and 2B. Jessica hesitated for a fraction of a second before her professional smile returned. "Oh, of course." She stepped aside, but her tone had a certain tightness to it, as if she wasn't convinced. Simone caught the brief flicker of something in Jessica's face. An unspoken question, a silent doubt. But she ignored it. They just wanted to get to their seats, settle in, and enjoy the flight. But Jessica? She wasn't quite ready to let it go. Something in her mind told her they didn't belong here, and that was going to be a problem. The first-class cabin on American Horizon Flight 227 was sleek and spacious, the kind of luxury that made long-haul travel almost enjoyable. Plush reclining seats, personal service, a curated menu. It was everything Nathan and Simone had worked so hard for. Ava climbed into her seat, her tiny fingers tracing the buttons on the armrest. "Mommy, look, my chair moves." Jaden, barely looking up from his game, muttered, "Cool." Simone chuckled, reaching over to help Ava adjust her seat. She loved how excited the kids were about small things. It reminded her to appreciate these moments. Nathan, meanwhile, was unbothered by the earlier interaction. He'd dealt with situations like that before. People assuming things, second-guessing him, treating him like he didn't belong. But he wasn't about to let it ruin their trip. Jessica Barnes, however, was still watching. She moved through the first-class cabin, assisting other passengers, but every so often her gaze drifted back to 2A and 2B. Something about them didn't sit right with her. She couldn't explain it, but years of experience told her that things weren't adding up. They didn't act like the usual first-class travelers, no designer luggage, no business suits, no quiet, effortless entitlement. The father wore a hoodie. The mother had on a simple yet elegant dress, but nothing flashy. Their kids were, well, kids, loud and excited. And then there was the way they carried themselves. Comfortable. Too comfortable. Like they thought they belonged here. Jessica pressed her lips together, then walked toward the front of the cabin where another flight attendant, Megan, was setting up the drink cart. "Hey," Jessica said in a low voice. "Did you check that family's boarding passes when they got on?" Megan glanced up. The one in 2A and 2B? Jessica nodded. Yeah, they're fine, Megan replied, twisting the cap on a bottle of sparkling water. Why? Jessica hesitated. She knew how this would sound, but something in her gut told her she was right. No reason, she said, forcing a smile. Just checking. But she wasn't done checking. A few minutes later, as the last passengers settled in, Jessica made her way back to 2A and 2B, this time with an air of authority. She stopped beside Nathan and Simone, flashing another polite but tight-lipped smile. Sir, ma'am, she said, keeping her voice even. I'm going to need to see your tickets again. Nathan looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. Why? Jessica didn't hesitate. Just a routine verification. Simone frowned. But we already scanned our passes at the gate. Jessica's smile didn't waver. I understand, ma'am, but sometimes mistakes happen. Nathan exhaled through his nose, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his phone. A few taps, and he had the digital boarding passes up on the screen. He turned the device toward Jessica. 2A and 2B, he said, his voice calm but firm. Like I said. Jessica barely glanced at it before stepping back. Thank you, she said, her tone clipped. She turned and walked away, but something still nagged at her. She needed another excuse, something that would make her suspicion valid. And then, as if on cue, Ava did exactly what Jessica had been waiting for. The little girl, still thrilled with the reclining seat, pressed one of the buttons too hard, causing her tray table to spring out with a loud clunk. It startled the older gentleman seated across the aisle, who looked over briefly before returning to his newspaper. Jessica turned sharply, her jaw tightening. This was it, the disruption she needed. She squared her shoulders, took a breath, and walked back over. She was about to make a decision that would change everything. Jessica stopped beside 2A and 2B, her hands clasped in front of her like a school principal about to discipline a student. She looked down at Ava, who was still fascinated by the tray table. I'm sorry, Jessica said, her voice smooth but firm. But I'm going to have to ask you to keep your children under control. This is a first-class cabin, and we expect a certain level of decorum. Nathan looked up from his phone, eyebrows slightly raised. Excuse me? Jessica's smile stayed in place, but there was a noticeable edge to her tone. It's a safety issue. If your daughter keeps playing with the seat functions, she could cause damage to the aircraft. Simone's mouth parted slightly, caught between confusion and irritation. She's just excited. She's not hurting anyone. Jessica folded her arms. Regardless, we have to ensure a comfortable environment for all passengers. She glanced around as if expecting others to back her up, but no one seemed particularly disturbed. Ava, sensing the tension, shrank back into her seat, gripping her stuffed bunny tightly. Nathan exhaled slowly, keeping his composure. Look, we're just sitting here, following the same rules as everyone else. So what exactly is the problem? Jessica's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to being questioned like this. I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voices, she said, even though neither Nathan nor Simone had raised theirs. You're being disruptive. Simone scoffed, crossing her arms. We're being disruptive. Nathan rubbed his temple, trying to keep calm. Okay, let's get something straight. We paid for these seats. We're sitting here quietly. My daughter is 7 years old. And now, all of a sudden, we're a problem. Jessica straightened. This was the pushback she'd been expecting. She knew this type. Entitled, argumentative, unwilling to follow simple rules. I'm sorry, sir, she said, her voice cool and detached. But I'm going to have to ask you to return to your assigned seats in economy. Silence. Nathan blinked. Simone's lips parted, but no words came out. For a moment, it was as if the air had been sucked out of the cabin. Even Jaden, who had been immersed in his game, looked up. "What?" Simone finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jessica didn't flinch. "This section is reserved for first-class passengers. If you're confused about your seating, I'd be happy to assist." Nathan cut her off. His voice was still calm, but there was an unmistakable sharpness to it now. "We are first-class passengers." Jessica didn't move. Nathan pulled out his phone again, flashing the same digital boarding passes she had already seen. 2A and 2B, he said, his tone clipped. "So if there's some issue, you might want to check your system instead of assuming we don't belong here." Jessica's smile flickered, just for a second. She wasn't expecting that. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "I'm going to need you to step off the plane so we can clear up this misunderstanding." Simone let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "You have got to be kidding me." Jessica turned to another flight attendant standing near the cockpit. "Can we get security to the cabin, please?" A few nearby passengers stiffened. Some exchanged glances. Others averted their eyes, pretending not to see what was unfolding. Nathan sat back, jaw clenched. He could feel his pulse in his ears. He had been here before. This exact moment, this exact feeling. It didn't matter how much money he had. It didn't matter how many hours he'd spent building his company from the ground up. To Jessica, he was just a man in a hoodie who couldn't possibly belong here. And she was about to humiliate his entire family over it. 2 uniformed airport security officers boarded the plane. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stiff posture, while the other was younger, looking almost apologetic. Jessica turned to them, arms folded. "They're refusing to comply with instructions," she said smoothly. "They're in the wrong seats and are causing a disturbance." The younger officer glanced at Nathan and Simone. They didn't look disruptive. If anything, they looked like every other first-class passenger, except maybe a little more annoyed. Nathan leaned forward. "So let me get this straight. You're kicking us off this plane in front of our kids because what? You think we don't belong here?" Jessica tilted her head. "Sir, I need you to remain calm." Simone let out a bitter laugh. "You want him to remain calm? You've been harassing us since we boarded." Jessica turned to the officers, sighing dramatically. "I tried to resolve this situation, but they're refusing to cooperate. I don't want to delay the flight for the other passengers." The tall officer, clearly tired of the tension, turned to Nathan. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us." Nathan stared at him, breathing through his nose. For a second, Simone thought he was going to refuse. She wouldn't have blamed him. But then, slowly, he stood up. Simone followed, shaking her head in disbelief. Jaden put his switch in his backpack without a word. Ava, tears forming in her big brown eyes, clutched her bunny tighter. Passengers watched in awkward silence as the Reynolds family gathered their things, walking toward the aisle with their heads high. Nathan glanced at Jessica one last time. She was already smirking, as if she had won something. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because the man she just kicked off the plane. He didn't just buy first-class seats, he owned the airline. The moment Nathan, Simone, and their children stepped into the terminal, the air felt thick. Not from humidity, but from sheer humiliation. Ava wiped at her eyes, confused and shaken. Jaden, usually unbothered by most things, stared at the floor, his jaw tight. Simone was fuming. "I swear, Nathan, if you don't say something." Nathan exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to his forehead. He wasn't the type to make a scene. He never had been. But this? This was beyond anything he was willing to tolerate. Before he could respond, the murmurs started. Gate agents whispered. A few passengers who had witnessed the incident were now hovering nearby, some shaking their heads, others pulling out their phones. One woman, a middle-aged traveler with a concerned look, approached Simone cautiously. "I saw everything," she said, her voice low. "That was wrong. Do you want me to call someone? Record a statement?" Simone offered a tight smile, appreciating the sentiment, but knowing that this situation wouldn't be handled by airport security or a viral video. No, this was bigger than that. A few feet away, a young man in a navy blue suit power-walked toward them, his face pale. His airport badge flashed as he adjusted his tie, eyes darting between Nathan and the flight crew still on board. "Mr. Reynolds?" he asked cautiously. Nathan turned, his expression unreadable. "I'm Daniel Ross, Director of Customer Relations," the man rushed out, his voice strained with panic. I just got word of what happened. Could we step over here for a moment?" Nathan didn't move. "Before we do that," Simone said, crossing her arms, "do you even know who my husband is?" Daniel swallowed hard. He absolutely did. That's why he was sweating. Nathan wasn't just a first-class passenger. He was one of the airline's largest investors. A few months prior, American Horizon Airlines had publicly announced a partnership with Reynolds Innovations, Nathan's billion-dollar tech company, touting it as a progressive step toward increasing diversity in corporate leadership. There had been interviews, press releases, photos with the CEO shaking Nathan's hand. And now one of their own flight attendants had forcibly removed him from a plane. Jessica Barnes had no idea she had just embarrassed the company at the highest level. And judging by the frantic movement near the gate, the higher-ups were just realizing the mess they were in. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mr. Reynolds, I sincerely apologize for what just happened. I assure you this is not a reflection of our airline's values. Nathan held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "You said you got word of what happened," he said, voice measured. "So, what exactly did you hear?" Daniel hesitated. He had not been expecting that. I was informed that there was a misunderstanding regarding your seats and that—" Simone scoffed. "A misunderstanding?" Nathan shook his head, lips pressed together. "Let me make something very clear," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I don't need a scripted corporate apology. I need accountability." Daniel's Adam's apple bobbed. "Of course, sir. Absolutely. The flight attendant in question will be—" Nathan cut him off. "Bring her here." Daniel blinked. "Sir." "You heard me," Nathan said. "Bring her here." Daniel's hands twitched at his sides, hesitating. But one look at Nathan's face told him this was not a request. Yes, sir," he stammered before hurrying toward the jet bridge. Simone exhaled, glancing at her husband. "Are you sure about this?" Nathan didn't respond immediately, but in his mind, he knew exactly how this was going to go. Because Jessica Barnes was about to learn the hard way that actions have consequences. Jessica Barnes stood near the front of the plane, sipping from a small cup of water, completely unbothered. As far as she was concerned, she had done her job. Passengers needed to follow the rules. If people weren't where they were supposed to be, it was her responsibility to handle it. She had seen that type before, pushing limits, acting like the rules didn't apply to them. It wasn't personal. At least, that's what she told herself. But when she saw Daniel Ross approaching with a face that looked 2 shades too pale, her stomach dropped. "What's going on?" she asked, straightening. Daniel didn't answer. He just jerked his head toward the exit, signaling for her to follow. Jessica's brows pulled together, but she complied, smoothing down her blazer as she stepped out of the aircraft. And that's when she saw them. Nathan and Simone Reynolds stood right there, waiting. Jessica's breath hitched. The kids were gone, probably taken to a quieter part of the terminal. But Nathan? His face was unreadable. Simone? Arms crossed, staring straight through her. Something about their presence, the way Daniel Ross hovered nearby like a man bracing for impact, sent a chill through her body. She knew instantly. Something was very, very wrong. "Jessica," Daniel started, his voice tight. "This is Mr. Nathan Reynolds." Jessica blinked. "Okay," Simone scoffed, shaking her head. Daniel's fingers twitched, as if resisting the urge to rub his temples. "Nathan Reynolds, as in the man who owns a controlling stake in this airline." Jessica froze. Her breath hitched so sharply it almost hurt. Nathan let the silence hang between them, giving her time to absorb the weight of those words. And then, finally, he spoke. "I'm going to give you a chance to explain yourself." Jessica's pulse pounded. I was just doing my job," she stammered. "There was confusion with the seating arrangements and I—" Nathan tilted his head slightly. "Confusion." Jessica swallowed hard. I thought they were in the wrong section." Simone narrowed her eyes. "Even after we showed you our tickets." Jessica opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Daniel exhaled through his nose, already exhausted by the damage control this was going to take. Nathan took a slow step closer. "Tell me something, Ms. Barnes. What exactly about my family made you assume we didn't belong in first class?" Jessica's throat tightened. There it was. The question she couldn't answer. Because no matter how she tried to spin it, the truth sat like a heavy stone in the pit of her stomach. Nathan gave her a moment to sit in that silence. Then finally he continued. "You had multiple chances to fix your mistake," he said, voice even. "At the gate. When you asked for our tickets the first time. When you called security. But instead, you doubled down. You embarrassed my wife. You humiliated my children. You turned an innocent moment into a public spectacle." Jessica's fingers curled into her palms. Daniel stepped in, clearing his throat. "Mr. Reynolds, we will be handling disciplinary action." Nathan raised a hand. "No need. I already know how this is going to end." Jessica's stomach flipped. Nathan turned his gaze back to her. "As of this moment, you're fired." Jessica staggered. "Wait. Your badge. Now." Jessica froze, looking between Nathan and Daniel, expecting someone to jump in, to soften the blow. But Daniel didn't even flinch. He knew better. Jessica felt her face burn as she slowly reached for her airline badge, unpinning it from her blazer. With shaky fingers, she placed it in Nathan's waiting palm. It was over. Just like that. She had kicked a billionaire off his own airline. And now, she had to walk out of that airport jobless. Nathan turned to Daniel. "Make sure this never happens again." Daniel nodded. "Understood, sir." Jessica, now numb, took a step back. Nathan looked at her one last time. "Next time you judge someone based on how they look, you might want to think twice." Jessica's throat was too tight to respond, because for the first time in her career, she wasn't in control. Jessica Barnes walked out of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport in a daze. Her hands trembled as she gripped the strap of her purse. Just an hour ago, she had been a senior flight attendant on one of the country's leading airlines. Now, she was nobody. No severance, no graceful exit. Just the harsh reality of knowing she had thrown away her career in a matter of minutes. All because she had made a terrible assumption. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, Nathan and Simone sat in a private lounge with their children, waiting for the airline's CEO to call personally. Jaden was quiet, staring at his juice box. Ava, still a little shaken, clung to her mother's side. Nathan rubbed his temples. He had spent years building his legacy, working twice as hard, proving himself in rooms where people like him were never expected to be. And yet, one flight attendant had erased all of that in an instant, because in her mind he couldn't possibly belong in first class. Simone sighed, watching him. "What are you thinking?" Nathan exhaled. "That no matter how much we achieve, no matter how much we succeed, we'll always run into people like her." Simone squeezed his hand. "Yeah, but this time, she didn't win." Nathan nodded, glancing at his children. "No, she didn't." Moments later, Daniel Ross returned, looking deeply relieved that things hadn't escalated further. "Mr. Reynolds," he said carefully, "the CEO has personally instructed that you and your family be upgraded to our private jet service for your trip to Maui, at no cost, of course." Nathan studied him for a moment. "And what else?" Daniel swallowed. "We'll be launching an internal review on all flight crew training procedures. This won't happen again." Nathan leaned back in his seat, letting the words settle. Good. That was the real win. Not the free flight, not the perks, the change. Because for once, the right people were being held accountable. And people like Jessica Barnes. They were learning the hard way that their assumptions had consequences. Nathan looked at his children, at the innocence in Ava's eyes, at the quiet anger in Jaden's. Then he turned to Daniel. "You tell your CEO that this isn't about an apology," Nathan said firmly. "This is about making sure that the next time a black family walks onto one of your planes, they're treated with the same respect as everyone else." Daniel nodded quickly. "Understood, sir." Nathan exhaled, then looked at Simone. "Let's go." As they stood, Ava slipped her tiny hand into Nathan's. "Daddy," she whispered. "Yeah, baby? Are we still going to Hawaii?" Nathan smiled down at her. "Yeah, baby girl, we are." Because no one, not even Jessica Barnes, was going to take that away from them. It's easy to judge people by how they look. It's easy to assume. But before you do, ask yourself, what if you're wrong? Because sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who can change your life forever. What would you have done in this situation? Have you ever experienced or witnessed something similar? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories that need to be heard.